And we got, oh yes, and we can start this evening. We have a very special guest from Germany, Dr. Michael Nahm, with a very broad interest in the psychic field. And this evening we are to know more about physical mediumship. I have heard you once or twice before giving overview of this research and how to test it scientifically, quite difficult sometimes. I'm looking forward to know more about this area, so I welcome you. Okay.
Yes. Göran, thank you very much for this introduction and also for the invitation to share some of my insights into current physical mediumship, but I will also start with kind of introduction, historical overview on physical mediumship and what went on in the past. So I'll now share my screen. Go here. Okay. So I wait a bit, and because it seems it always needs some time to load until I can forward my slides. So yeah, I will be talking about current physical mediumship, an overview and some examples. And below you see I'm from the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health, which is a, if you like, a parapsychological research institute in Freiburg, Germany. And here on this slide, you see two current physical mediums, Warren Kaler and Kai Mügge, and these are among those I will be talking about in this talk. Okay, so I will provide a brief physical, an overview on physical mediumship, then discuss some current physical mediums and come to some conclusions as usual in such talks. So physical mediums are generally thought to be kind of mediators between the worlds, and they often communicate or are said to communicate with the deceased. And this is usually thought via physical anomalies. That's why they are called physical mediums, in contrast to mental mediums, who provide more clairvoyant or telepathical information obtained by the deceased. And the mediumship in general, or spiritism, the movement of spiritism, is thought to have started in 1848 in this house where the Fox family lived, and three sisters, the Fox sisters, lived there as well. And they famously once noticed that there was some raps and strange sounds going on in this house, and they attributed this to a deceased communicator. And this was the birth of spiritism, which very rapidly swept across the Western countries, also in Europe and so on. But speaking of the phenomenology like raps and communications with the deceased, and also physical phenomena associated with people who seem to mediate such phenomena, have of course been known also before. For example, in Germany, the seeress of Prevorst was also somebody who might be regarded as a physical medium. She also went in kind of trance states, and people reported raps, levitations of objects and all that stuff. And she also communicated with ostensibly deceased individuals. So spiritism may have started in 1848, but physical mediums or sensitive persons obviously existed also long before that. And so one might say that from 1848, there was kind of a classical spiritist phase concerning mental, but also physical mediumship. And talking about physical mediumship in particular, there's what I call it a kind of an experimental phase that started at least in the West, like Southern America and all these countries are a different story again. But in the West, there was from the 1900s on an increased interest by academics, professors and scientists of different contexts who became increasingly interested in these phenomena, most notably in Germany, Albert von Schrenck-Notzing, but many others as well. And they studied really these phenomena and tried to work with mediums in laboratories, and sometimes even constructed laboratories to work with them, to test with them, to investigate their phenomena. And I chose the the date 1909, because this was the time that Albert von Schrenck-Notzing and others got seriously engaged in investigating this medium, Eva C. She was most famous for producing such a white kind of substance, which is called ectoplasm. And from that time on, many subsequent mediums appeared on the scene, and particularly those who also produced ectoplasm. You see here Stanislava Popielska, Anna Nielsen, Mina Crendon, or Marjorie. This is Jack Weber. Here's Mary Marshall. But it's interesting to note that this basically all started after Eva C. She was the first one who really became famous for producing these amorphous white substances. And as many of you will certainly know, there was also lots of fraud and scandals involved in all these investigations and in some of these mediums. So quite an interesting time. And most of the images that you know of people sitting in dark spaces, producing white masses, that's from that time of physical mediumship. And it kind of ended during World War II simply because of a lack of resources, lack of mediums, and lack of researchers interested in that stuff. Then there might be what could be called kind of a British spiritualist phase that commenced after World War II, which is characterized by really a dearth of physical mediums. They almost died out. There were only very few, and those who still existed lived in England. Yeah, I think it's, in general, one can put it in this way. One of these mediums was Gordon Higginson, was quite famous at that time. He was the president of the Spiritualists National Union for more than 20 years. And he also was the director for a long time for Stansted Hall and Arthur Findlay College. He also produced lots of ectoplasm, and also in his dark seances, fully fledged materialized figures were said to move about. But there's some interesting literature on that discoveries, and some people thought that, of course, that is all a cheat. And it is also said that especially the inner circle of Arthur Findlay College knew very well that these aspects, at least of Gordon Higginson, were cheated, but they did nothing about it. Then this is the phase of physical mediumship that I will be talking about largely for the rest of my topic, which can be called the modern phase, because from the 1990s on, we see an increased interest in physical mediumship again. And this also started in the UK. A very prominent figure promoting this development was Robin Foy, who just recently died. And he became most famous for the sittings held in the so-called Skull Hole, a cellar room in Skull, and the phenomena reported from there. The SPR, the British SPR, performed also some investigations for 2 years about this phenomena, published the highly controversial Skull Report, and other people published prominent and well-known books on this skull experiments, and also Robin Foy published books on his own, for example, this one, Witnessing the Impossible. Now, Robin Foy started to promote physical mediumship at the end of the 80s, I'd say, because he got to know a certain person by the name of Colin Fry, who turned out to be a great physical medium and a regular spirit communicator, communicating through Gordon Higginson, through Colin Fry was, by the way, Gordon Higginson. It's very typical that especially also physical mediums have spirit communicators of very prominent people that are always or often associated with the history of what they themselves are doing. So in 1990, the Noah's Ark Society for Physical Mediumship was founded, and founding members also included Stuart Alexander. And in 1991, Colin Fry gave his first public séance, which was regarded as quite a success. Stuart Alexander very soon followed, and it's also interesting to note that sometimes the communicators speaking through Stuart Alexander were the same communicators that spoke through Colin Fry. This is also a very typical aspect of physical mediumship that we see, that the mediums seem to legitimize each other because they use, because the same spirits communicate through them. And we also shortly after saw the beginnings of the sitting in the skull hole, but also in Skull, when Colin Fry was there present as a guest medium, the first scandal shook the Noah's Ark Society because he was caught cheating. It was a big scandal, also published in Psychic News. You see it here. Suddenly the light went on during that seance, and he was caught standing on a chair waving his trumpet. And yeah, and people, of course, didn't like that too much. So Colin Fry also retreated from most of physical mediumship activities, did something else again later on. But this was not a very good start for that. Anyway, in 1995 to 97, the investigation I already mentioned of the SPR of the skull phenomena took place, and 1999 saw the publication of the skull report, which aroused quite some interest and controversy. And also as a result of all these developments, more and more mediums and physical mediums showed up on the scene and also gave public sittings. And owing to this development, Robin Foy also founded this website, it's Physical Mediumship for You, in 2009. And at that time, I was also already involved in all this. And I was actually kind of one of the first members who subscribed to that list. But it turned out that this was, after all, a very strange list, because it was extremely uncritical and also, in my opinion, highly suspicious what some of the folks posted there. And if you would utter kind of a criticism of one of this or that medium, Robin Foy was very quick to ban you from the list. And this is also what happened later on when I posted very critical comments on Kai Mügge after I found out that he was a fake. I was immediately banned by Robin from that list. So after all, it's good if you want to have fun and hear some crazy things about physical mediumship, go there. But apart from that, it's, in my opinion, just a worthless piece of internet. So I made some critical remarks about physical mediumship already. And sometimes people ask me, yeah, well, Michael, do you think there was anything genuine in that at all? And I actually think yes. I think physical mediumship, also macro physical phenomena, macro PK, levitation, all that stuff upwards is highly interesting. And I do think that some mediums were able to produce genuine macro phenomena. Among the ones that I like is Daniel Hume, or is it Eusapia Palladino, Intridason, also Carlos Mirabelli, controversial as he is. I think there's some weird stuff about him that's really difficult to explain away. And in more recent times, Nina Kulagina and also Uri Geller, who is of course also very controversial, but who's also been investigated quite a bit. And I know so many people who knew him in person or had experiences with him. He's still alive, and they swear that he had done very weird things. And I'm inclined to believe that there's something genuine about Uri Geller as well. So yes, I think basically there's something out there. It's also supported by this medium called Herbert Baumann. I never met him in person, but I know Illobrand von Ludwiger quite well. It's this person here. And when Illobrand was younger, he was quite a close friend of Herbert Baumann. And he was a medium said to be able, or had a kind of a speciality to produce apports of stones. And when these stones appeared, they were hot to touch. And they also appeared in bright light, not only in darkness. So Illobrand at one point even saw objects appear in bright light in front of him and just in the middle of the air and then gently float down to the floor. And another peculiarity of Herbert Baumann's stone apports was that they were very peculiarly permeated by cracks. And sometimes to such a degree that if you would handle them carelessly or let them fall on a table, whatever, they would just disintegrate and fall apart. And so here's one of image of such a piece of a broken cut quartz crystal. And you see that there's a very rugged surface and with lots of highly structured, lots of angles and twists and all that stuff. I tried even to replicate such replicate such cracks and was unable to do so. If you are able to produce cracks in quartz crystals, for example, they usually are much more even due to the tension of the stones, and I never managed to produce this kind of cracks by whatever means I used. And Illobrand also, he went to several jewelers and showed them such stones and asked them, have you any idea how this could be produced? Have you ever seen something like this? And all the people said, no, they never have seen anything like this. And they also have no idea about how such cracks can be produced in gems or in semi-gems. We published a paper on that in 2016 in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And if you want to check this out, it's free on the internet. So turning now to the current physical mediums that I will focus on in the remainder of this talk. There are some today, but I think 4 are most prominently talked of. In America, we have Michael Nahm. In England, there's Warren Kaler. In Germany, we have Kai Mügge. And in Australia, there's Gary Mannion. And I will be talking about these 3 guys in the following simply because these are the guys that I know best and the ones I know most about. Beginning with Gary Mannion. So he's an Australian medium, as I said already, but he was surrounded by suspicions of fraud for quite some time because even some of his closest sitters eventually got suspicious because they thought that they recognized himself walking around in darkened seance rooms when the light conditions were in such a way that it was not perfectly dark. Sometimes it happens that some light source enters the room, I don't know. So they were convinced that it was himself. And especially one of his actually close friends at one point during a sitting even went to the cabinet and checked if he's still there, sitting there motionless, bound to the chair in trance while phenomena were occurring, and he found that the chair was empty. So due to this and other suspicions, people mounted at one sitting an infrared camera into the seance room and filmed the entire sitting without Gary Mannion being aware of it. And it turned out that indeed Gary Mannion just freed himself from the bounds in the chair and produced all the phenomena by himself. And for those who are not too familiar with these types of sittings, you see here a part of a curtain, kind of a tent. Here's the chair behind that tent, and the mediums are usually bound to these chairs and to the arm rests of the chairs with cable binds or other binds to make sure that they cannot free themselves. Then those mediums enter a deep trance and allegedly rest there more or less motionless while in the large space in front of this cabinet, the spirits perform all kinds of miracles and paranormal activities. And you find this recording on the internet, both the entire 2.5 hours or how long it goes, but also some short sections on it. And now I would like to try to show this video to you about how Gary produces psychic cool breezes in the room by hurling his shirt around in the air and how he moves a trumpet. And now let's see if this works. It might be not so easy to share this video on this screen. So I know this was the way it didn't work, I remember. Let's close that. So how did that work? I went on my desktop. Started a video. And then there was the opportunity to choose another screen. Do you see that? Göran? Oh, okay. So if you see that, you've seen already that this is the cabinet where Gary is actually supposed to rest motionless and in a trance state, but he freed himself of the binds and walked out of the cabinet. Now he gets undressed and is about to produce a paranormal spirit breeze for all the sitters who paid lots of money to go into this place and see some of the miracles from the beyond. So I think that's a very interesting documentary showing of what really happens when you go at a sitting with Gary Mannion. And this is also how the website was called, or the film that was called, that the people eventually put up on the internet for all to see. In the meantime, it has been removed, but it's still available at the web archive if you know where to look. Actually, I will also show this link sooner. And now he walks to the sitters and touches their knees, and pretending, of course, that some spirit energies are touching the sitters and doing all this and that. Okay. So I close that one. Now I need to return to my presentation, it seems, here. Okay. Can you see that again? So let's turn now to, no, I didn't copy that on my desktop, so it might not move. But here is actually another movie. Well, it's very much of a similar kind that the one I've showed you before. And in that video, you would see how Gary comes out of the cabinet again and walks around with this cardboard trumpet in his hand. And this trumpet then is carried by him through the air. Of course, it's supposed to be carried by spirits, and it reacts to people's talks and requests, and it touches on its head and so on. And now it's very instructive to see. And this is also, it's all on the internet, and it's all visible as a video. This is a still from this video showing how Gary is also producing ectoplasm. So the curtains of the cabinet have in this case been removed at the end of the sitting. So you see him sitting free on his chair, and he bends over, producing ectoplasm from his mouth. And in this video, you can see very nicely how he puts it into his mouth and then lets it hang around there. And then he falls back motionless on his chair, and then instructs people to turn on the red light so that people can see the ectoplasm shining on him. And then presumably via some verbal or other signals, stomping his foot, whatever, it gives the signal again to switch the light off again, because ectoplasm is so sensitive, it cannot stand the light for very long, so it can only be seen in a very dim red light for very short periods. And then when the light is switched off again, he again starts moving and draping the ectoplasm into some other form, because he again becomes motionless and lets the light turn on and all that. So that's 2.5 hours, very instructive video material showing how physical medium Gary acts. Yeah, this is the link. So if you want to check it out in the web archive, you should still be able to find it there. Turning now to Warren Kaler, that's the medium from England. So he's also able to produce ectoplasm, also apports. Many of those mediums, also Michael Shane and others, and also Kai Mügge, they produce apports from their mouth, in which kind of quartz crystals or glass stones originating from Shambhala, in the mystical heavenly realm of the Indian cultures, or maybe the theosophists, and so this is where these apports come from. But also Warren Kaler has quite a history of suspicions of fraud, because and already at several occasions the light conditions were strong enough so that the sitters, even some, again, good friends of his, suddenly recognized that the spirits who allegedly walk around in Warren Kaler's sittings were nobody else than Warren Kaler himself. And the last time that Warren Kaler was exposed was in 2014. And interestingly, the guy who was behind this exposure, or who was part of it, was nobody else than Gary Mannion. And this took place when Warren Kaler was supposed to give a few sittings in Australia. And the organizers wanted to test him before and said, "Hey, Warren, if you want to do some sittings here in Australia, we need to be sure that you can do cool phenomena. So let's show us what you can." And Gary Mannion allegedly was with them. And so he knows, of course, very well how to bind mediums to prevent them from producing fraudulent phenomena. And so during the first test sitting, nothing happened at all. And during the third sitting, when they told Warren, no, sorry, if you will not be able to produce genuine phenomena at the third sitting, we cannot promote your sitting because you cannot do any phenomena. So, and as it turned out, the third sitting was successful, and the usual phenomena that occurred with Warren Kaler happened. But after the sitting, it turned out that the binds that with which he was fastened to the chair were just broken, and he had bloody wounds on his wrists, pretty much suggesting that he just freed himself with poor violence. And as the saying goes, he was transported straight to the airport and sent back to England. So you can also see that all these mediums who often claim to be very spiritual and very friendly with each other. And so it's kind of a shark's basin. So if you enter the territory of one, he will just kind of bite you away. But not always. Other people are more friendly to each other. For example, Kai Mügge is a good friend of Warren Kaler, and also Bill Meadows. He's another medium, but I don't think that he performs anymore. But this is also very instructive to know that all these mediums were, during the golden days of their mediumship career, invited by a very rich person to go to Ibiza, to a villa, and to hold joint sittings and have a good time for 1 or 2 weeks all together. And at that occasions, also some of these mediums gave joint sittings. So in this example, Warren Kaler entered into a trance, and his spirit communicators communicated. And Bill Meadows entered the trance in parallel. So there were two entranced mediums with their respective spirits cooperating in that room. And other mediums and other prominent figures of that time, like Kai Mügge, were guest sitters. And on the next evening, this would shift. Then Kai would give the sitting, and the other would be guests and just listen. And so I have an audio example that shows you what happens when Warren Kaler and Bill Meadows enter a trance and spirit communicators of them interact. And a few words in advance. So you will also hear some of those, the guest sitters, and the voice, the loudest voice that shouts the most and most frequently and most prominently. This is Kai Mügge, who is really very keen on giving support for this fantastic mediumistic phenomena. And this audio example is an example of two child spirits. Tommy is a very little child that manifests at Warren Kaler's seances, and Marie is a female child, of course, who manifests in sittings with Bill Meadows. And Marie talks like this. Hello, I'm Marie. I'm very shy, but it's good to be here. And Tommy talks like this. Hello, I'm Tommy. And it's really weird. So this is what you're going to hear now. So you can maybe distinguish those two voices. I hope this will work. It's not a video. It's only an audio tape. And this is also, if you know where to look, it's all available free on the internet, that stuff. I just turn it loud. And could you please nod if you hear something? Can you hear that? I should say that you have to imagine that this is a pitch black darkness, and the children are now interacting, the sitters are cheering, and they will soon handle all these objects that have been placed in the middle of the room. They are supposed to play with it and have some fun. This is what you're going to hear soon. This is Marie. Tommy. So I really love that. I just had to show that. It's a very good example of what the spirits do when they come and visit the seances of these people. And turning back to my presentation, I hope it works again. Now. So I hope you were able to hear some of these voices, and especially also the voice of Tommy, because although, as I explained already, there are very strong indications and strong evidence supporting the notion that Warren Kaler spirits are not really genuine, some people maintain that they certainly are. Well, one of these people who do is Eckhard Kruse. He's a professor in Germany for applied informatics, I think. And he is also very fascinated by a phenomena of physical mediumship. And what he did is he analyzed the voices of those spirits that occur in Warren Kaler's seances, and specifically with regard to their formants. Like, every human voice is composed of different frequencies, of course, and these frequencies are characterized or characteristical frequencies of the voice of human beings are located in specific areas in their frequency spectrum, and this is called the formants. And he argued that the voices of some of Warren Kaler spirits, especially that of Tommy, is too different in terms of their formants, that it cannot originate from an adult person like Warren Kaler, because this Tommy speaks like this. A little child has formants that are typical for a child, and that cannot be imitated. So it's kind of a bold claim, and I thought I might just, rather than believing it, testing it, and I tried to disguise my voice, and I tried to imitate Tommy. And you can see that now this is Michael Nahm. This is my normal voice with a certain vocal that I say. And when I try to imitate Tommy, I am well able to lift formant 4, that is formant 1, formant 2, 3, 4, by 1,000 hertz to that level. This is what Eckhard Kruse says is impossible, because Tommy, when Warren Kaler speaks, has that type of formants. So it's kind of a simple thing to do with a special voice analysis software. And this is one of the reasons why I still think it's pretty obvious that Warren Kaler spirits are maybe not what they claim to be. And I published a paper on that, and also on other physical mediums in 2018, also in the GSE. Turning now to Kai Mügge, which is arguably the medium I know best. He also runs a website, kaimügge.de currently. And this is Kai, and this is his wife, Julia, who works with him and is together with him for quite some years in the meantime. I came to know Kai already in 2008, when he was just starting his public, or when he just started to go public with his group for physical mediumship that met in regular intervals in the cellar of the house where he lived. So this is the house in Hanau where Kai lives, or lived at that time, and this is where we met, in the cellar of this house. He's, in the meantime, he became quite prominent and even appeared on the title page of the Paranormal Review. This is a photograph of the early days in the cellar. And when I met Kai, we were only doing table phenomena, sitting in the dark, and doing experiments and hoping that the table would move in strange ways and even levitate. This was quite an exciting thing to do, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And already at that time, occasional reports would appear, like stones would fall from out of nowhere down into the room. And only thereafter, in the 2009, 2010, Kai started to develop entering a trance state and let spirit communicators communicate through him. There were a number of them, but eventually it turned out that Hans Bender became his most prominent and regular spirit communicator, which incidentally is also the founder of the institute where I'm presently sitting in and working at. And also at that time, only Kai entered or worked with his cabinet. The cabinet I showed you already before with Gary Mannion. Medium sits separate from the other sitters on a chair, often surrounded by curtain, to provide a special shelter to concentrate the energy more closely to the medium itself, and also to prevent potential unwanted light to enter the body of the medium, which is thought to be very, very light sensitive and so on. And then at some distance from the medium, here's the action zone. Objects would be placed that can be handled in this or another way, just as I also showed you before in this audio recording. When Tommy and Marie started to play with all these types of things, you put them somewhere in the room and the spirits go there and enter this action zone and manipulate all kinds of objects. And all the material that I will be showing on the next slide is also from the internet. It's publicly available if you know where to look for it. Or it was. As I will show you, I will tell you soon, Kai removed quite a bit of that stuff. For example, images showing this red light, which Kai introduced in 2011 as the essence of ectoplasm. You know, ectoplasm is that white stuff, which is kind of a really vital paranormal substance. And the essence of the ectoplasm, a pure concentrated form of vital energy, is that red spot, blob. And Kai showed it usually in such a way that the cabinet would be opened. He sits in this cabinet, and then all of a sudden his closed fist would shine in a very bright red light, and then he would open the hand, and this little red light would lift from the hand, move around the room, very close to the medium usually, but still move seemingly freely around, perform all kinds of weird movements. And this was also performed as one of the highlights of the seances, and typically displayed before the closing of the seance. And he did show this essence of ectoplasm quite fairly regularly until 2013. But I show you later, at one point, I found out that this was no essence of ectoplasm, but it was something that I could do as well. So this is a photograph showing myself, and you see here the essence of the ectoplasm leaving my own hand, performing the same circular movements that Kai's essence of the ectoplasm did, and also all the other stuff. I was able to do all that myself. Why? Because I found out that Kai used this kind of a magician's trick. It's called the D-Light Flight. You can order it in, or at that time, I don't know if it's still available, in shops, online shops for magicians, and as a gimmick. It's basically only a rubber fake thumb that you put on your own thumb, and with a switch in it, and you can switch a red LED on, which is located at the end of this wire. And if you move the thumb, the wire and the light, of course, move around quite erratically in the space. And if you move it a little faster, it also displays these peculiar impulses, because it's not a constant glow, but it has an impulse for whatever reason. And this gives this impression of being interrupted movements or interrupted light displays. So the reasons why I found out about it with the help of the circle leader of Kai's circle at that time was because Kai always wanted to be photographed at that time, and we had photo series at our disposal. And because I was very suspicious about Kai in the meantime, I had a closer look at this specific photo series, and I found out that he moved his thumb in accordance with that white light. So when the thumb goes down, and that red light would go down, and in the next photograph, when the thumb would go up, the light would go up again. And this was the only part of the body of Kai that would move. He would sit motionless in his cabinet and move only the thumb, and the red light would move in accordance. So that was really what got me hooked. So that's we created kind of a video in which we put all these photos into a series, one after each other, and this made these movements really convincingly obvious. And after I called Kai and told him, hey, Kai, have you ever heard of the D-light flight? And do you know what that is? And do you use it in your sittings? I said, no, I never heard what you're talking about. I never heard anything about that stuff. And, oh, come on, it's a genuine phenomenon. And so he denied having ever heard of all that stuff. But when I looked at his blog, only, I don't know, maybe the next day, I found that he had already removed all these images from his blog because he already knew that I got him. And he wanted to hide the traces that showed these so-called spectacular spirit lights. And I did some further investigations because we know from these photographs the shutter speed or the exposure time used to take these photographs, like how many milliseconds that it took to do the image. And you can also count these impulses. It turned out that Kai's essence of the ectoplasm had an impulse frequency of 25 per second. This is the exact same frequency that my D-light flight also has. It's a very peculiar coincidence. And even more, the circle leader at that time, also a good friend of Kai, found a D-light flight in his travel bag. And so at one point, we had enough material together to really press him. And in 2014, he factually then confessed having used the D-light flight, although immediately after, he always said, no, he never confessed. It's a big, big and shameful lie, but he did it. And it's obvious anyway. You don't even need a confession. But if you know that this phenomenon is a fake with a fake thumb and a fake spirit light, what about the ectoplasm that, for example, lies here between his feet and in front and behind his water bottle? I think there are very serious reasons to assume that this ectoplasm can only be a fake then as well. Especially since not only in this one occasion, but on several occasions, this D-light flight was used by Kai before the display of the ectoplasm, sometimes together with the display of the normal ectoplasm, sometimes alternatingly. So he showed the spirit light, then ectoplasm, then again the spirit light, and then ectoplasm, all intermittently with turning the lights on and off and retreating into the cabinet and coming, opening it again. And so there can only be one conclusion. The trance and the ectoplasm must also be faked. And of course, especially that the trance is faked is, in my opinion, very damning for the entire phenomenology displayed by Kai Mügge throughout the entire seance. But also here there is more, because as it happens, through some interesting coincidences, we found out that Kai ordered huge amounts of Halloween cobweb in online stores for Halloween gimmicks. And I noticed very quickly that some of this Halloween cobweb is very similar to some of the ectoplasm that Kai Mügge displays. So I asked him, Kai, have you ever heard of Halloween cobweb? Or do you possibly use it in your seances? He said, no, of course, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of Halloween cobweb. What are you talking about? And I said, well, come on, Kai. I have the original transaction documents of your verified where you bought it in the online shops. He said, yes, I bought it. Now that you said you're right, I wanted to see if Halloween cobweb looks similar to my ectoplasm, because some people said it looks similar. So I tested if ectoplasm looks similar to Halloween cobweb, but it doesn't look similar, not at all. And it's true, of course, for this type of ectoplasm that he showed in this seance, for example, with this red light. It looks like a more mosquito net type of ectoplasm. I bought myself a really beautiful white mosquito net and was also able to produce photos of that kind. But obviously, this is not Halloween cobweb. Kai is right in this part. But Kai produces very many shapes and forms of ectoplasm that look very much like this Halloween spider web. For example, this was one photo of a series he posted on his blog where he allegedly produced ectoplasm in daylight when he was at home in a trance state, and now he produced it from his mouth and tongue. Very not so nice to look at, but instructive anyway. And so, and after this phone conversation where I asked him also about the ectoplasm and the cobweb, I went also the next day, maybe I went to see on his blog and to look if of the similarities. And I found that already, again, he quickly removed this post. But because also the other blog posts of the daylight flight, I had saved them already on my computer, and also they're all on the web archive. I will save them there, so if you know where to look, they're still available. And so, but I was, of course, also interested to see if I can replicate Kai's ectoplasm with my Halloween cobweb as well. And I think I did fairly well. In contrast to what Kai says, I think my Halloween cobweb looks very much like his ectoplasm, especially if you know how it really looks like. You see also, you can really find these very peculiar structures. It's what I call the characteristical small zigzag structures of filaments of this Halloween cobweb. And it's very interesting that Kai's ectoplasm displays that as well. So here's an enlargement section, and you see in this really tiny zigzag patterns. This is very characteristical for a Halloween spider web. It's part of the production process, I assume. But there is more. It's in many ways you can demonstrate that this stuff is extremely similar. This is a photograph taken by Shannon Taggart showing Kai Mügge in his cabinet with a huge amount of ectoplasm. This is my Halloween cobweb. And I would say, again, it's rather similar. And you can even see that's what I call the large zigzag patterns of filament bundles, which is, again, something that's obviously due to the production process of this material. And you find it here and you find it there. And again, I don't see any difference. Sorry, Kai. And also here, I don't see any difference. That's, again, it's ectoplasm that was photographed in one of Kai's seances, and that's my cobweb. Yeah, looks pretty similar, I'd say. So there are many converging lines of evidence, in my opinion, that the ectoplasm is not genuine as well. And some people know about all this. I mean, maybe not today because the discussion has calmed down, and yeah, many of the people that are now fans of Kai maybe don't even know all these controversies of the years past. But at that time, many people said, yeah, maybe this red spirit lights and ectoplasm is fake, but Kai does all these really weird eye reports and they cannot possibly be faked. And he put some videos on the internet. I only showed some photographs because it's not something that it looks very nice. But the essence of that story is that Kai produced all kinds of objects from his lower eye sockets in trance at the end of the sittings, also as a highlight of the seances, such as quartz crystals and other objects. And of course, this is something, if you first see it or hear about it, it looks very genuine and very impressive, because just think of a tiny spark of dust entering your eye and it really hurts. It's not something that is nice to have. And just imagine you have an entire stone in your eye. It just will cause so much pain that you cannot barely stand it. And that's also the argument that Kai always uses. You cannot possibly fake my eye reports because it would just hurt so much and it's impossible. But because I was fairly convinced that Kai was a fake, I just tried to replicate it myself. And lo and behold, I found it's in fact very easy. So this is also stills from a video that I produced. I'm also able to produce the very same eye reports than Kai can produce. And it just takes a little practice. But the very surprising thing is that it doesn't hurt at all. The lower eye sockets are not at all susceptible to pain in a similar degree than the front of the eye. And you can put all kinds of stuff in there. Even I had metal chains in there, all kinds of stones and things. You just need to make sure that it's clean. You don't want to have an infection in there, I suppose. But once the surface that shows towards the eyeball is not too rugged and too sharp, it really doesn't hurt. And you can carry around objects in these eye sockets for 1 or 2 hours. I did so, and only then come up with a very impressive eye report. So again, I'm pretty convinced that anybody who is willing to practice this weird art a little bit can do these things. I've written 2 papers on Kai and a little bit more. It's also in the GSE for people interested in that. Now, as you may guess, my relationship with Kai came to an unfavorable end. I was not really interested in studying any longer, and he was obviously also not interested in working with me anymore. So I followed still every now and then what he did, and his phenomena continued to develop quite remarkably. And in some later years, he produced full materializations of spirit figures during his seances, such as this guy. And of course, people said, well, how can you be sure that that's not you, Kai? And he said, just look at me. And put this photo on his blog as well. If I would be impersonating these spirits myself, this would look like that. And obviously, I'm much too tall, much too large, much too huge. So if you compare my picture with the picture of that spirit figure, it's obvious that I cannot possibly be the same person as this guy. But I mean, just look at that. And I mean, already this says it all. How if Kai would be really faking full materializations or wanting to fake it, he would, of course, not step out of the cabinet in this way. I mean, that would be insane. Of course, he would not do that and try to hide as good as possible that it's he who would do that. And so if you look at this figure and all the other figures, there are many examples in the internet. All of them seem to lean out of the cabinet with only the top of the trunk. So the legs are, of course, not visible. And moreover, they always have this strange shape here, which obviously suggests that he's moving this way, putting the elbow in the front so that the white drapery can fall down in front of him and hide all the feet and everything that's behind it. And he also turns to the side. So, of course, for Kai, it would absolutely be no problem, in my opinion, to just lean out of the cabinet in this manner. And it's absolutely a ridiculous argument to say, well, if I would be a spirit, I would look like this. No. So if you have a close look at some of these full materializations, the conclusion that I draw from knowing other photographs of Kai and from the history of the phenomena that he produces, my conclusion is that, of course, it's Kai. And he kind of wears all these weird head drapery and always very peculiar beards in case he, or in case man materializations materialize. And some occasions he also materializes female figures, but then they are all covered entirely behind the white veil or behind very peculiar black hair. So you never see a face of a female materialization in case they occur. One may wonder why. So one last thing. I know an interview, I've seen it, and I even have the audio track. And it never aired, but I know it's real. He was interviewed, press interview. Kai, what do you say about all these charges of fraud that have been that people advanced you? And look at the evidence regarding ectoplasm, and so it's not that bad. What do you say in your defense? And so the interviewer pressed Kai a bit, and at one point Kai said this in paraphrase: "Yeah, of course I cheat, just like all other mediums, in case I awake from trance too early. But this is not systematic cheating." And if you think of it, that's a really crazy thing to say for him, because in my opinion, to my knowledge, there was never a blank sitting. All the sittings for paying guest sitters ended successfully. So if he says something like that, I assume one has to conclude he already done it. But if this would be true, we can only conclude that he must be conscious during the entire sitting and not in a trance, because he usually says that he is in a trance during the sittings and he has complete amnesia. So when he awakes from the trance, he never knows anything about what happened. And I've witnessed this more than a dozen of times. When Kai awoke, at least at that time, I think it's maybe similar today, he always woke up like this. Oh, is the sitting already ready? How was it? Where am I? My head is aching. I'm so sick. And what happened? So he has this full amnesia. Now, if he claims to know when I wake up, so if he awakes, he can obviously not know what has happened before. And this is how he always acts. He cannot even know if he woke up too early or not. And this is also the question that he often poses. Is it already over? How was it? And so the claim that he is in a trance and has amnesia must be wrong if he now claims to know that if he awoke too early or not. It cannot be both the case. And again, if he had amnesia and would wake from a trance prematurely, he could hardly replace his main communicator, Hans Bender, seamlessly without anybody noting the change of communicators between the real Hans Bender and the one that Kai Mügge now kind of imitates, because he somehow realized that he awoke too early, because he cannot even know what happened before. But still, Kai Mügge, for some reason, is apparently able to replace Hans Bender seamlessly without anybody noticing it. And this alone is a very peculiar thing to assume. But anyway, be that as it may, he must be practicing the speaking manners and also the use of the vocabulary of Hans Bender, and must be able to imitate him 100% perfectly. And this is also peculiar because he himself never knows how Hans Bender speaks. He can only listen to recordings if his claim about amnesia and trance would be true. And of course, most damningly, he must prepare all that stuff and must smuggle the props, the ectoplasm, the apports, etc., in and also out of the seance room preventively to be able to react appropriately to finish the seance successfully in case he awakes too early and produces the spectacular phenomena that always come at the end. And of course, he must also train all this phenomena, and he must train it very well so nobody notices that he's actually cheating. And he also always says that his phenomena cannot be reproduced by normal means. But if he now says he does it himself, obviously they can be produced by normal means. So all that is really weird stuff. In my opinion, it's all a big fraud, and has been from the beginning. Now, I'm slowly coming to a close with my talk. Now, the pandemic obviously brought some kind of a halt to all these physical mediums and all the sittings, because they were simply not possible to hold them. But now it seems also the physical mediums regain strength and interest, and so the show must go on. Regarding Warren Kaler, he just, it's not so long ago, he posted this YouTube video and advertising spirit readniks. That's how he called it. I assume he means readings. And you can, kind of take this service from Warren Kaler and pay $175 to receive such a trance reading from him, and communicators that will inform you about your spiritual aspect of the afterlife and your own life include very prominently, for example, Winston Churchill. I really recommend watching this video on YouTube. It's really great. Watch it and decide for yourself if that's something that's worth pursuing. Regarding Gary Mannion, he's on the upside as well, especially in continental Europe. The Baal Psi Association has always been very active and still is very active in promoting these physical mediums. So Gary Mannion, you know him already. This is the video I showed you earlier, and also the video that I didn't show you, unfortunately. He was the one who was filmed secretly with infrared camera. He will be giving 4 seances in March. And you can also book additional psychic surgery events. And looking at the money, well, it's not uninteresting. For every person per participant pays 180 Swiss francs, and there's 20 participants. I think it's even a conservative estimate. There's often more. So that would result in 3,600 Swiss francs per séance. And there's 4 of them. So that would be about 15,000 Swiss francs for evenings, plus a few thousand Swiss francs for all these psychic surgeries, which certainly several people will also book. So that's quite a cool business model. The same goes for Kai. He's also still very prominent at the Bail Psi Association. He gives, for example, in May, he will be giving 9 seances, similar costs and prices. And of course, all these mediums give seances here and there and all the time, like Kai. If you look on his own website, he is on a calendar of events. He will be in June. He will be giving a number of 3 or maybe 5 seances at different venues. Again, yeah, lots of money to be earned, even if you assume a conservative approach. Well, good stuff. I mean, if you earn about 10, 15,000 euros or Swiss francs in a few evenings, I know people who don't earn that much. So my conclusions: physical mediumship and macro PK is, in my opinion, a very fascinating and important, but also a topic, but it's very, very difficult to study, especially with physical mediums who rely on darkness, cabinets, and all kinds of restraints that are usually opposed on those who want to investigate them in a proper sense. It's the darkness and all this other stuff usually surrounding, especially commercial physical mediums, is a perfect playground for fraudsters. And this is, in my opinion, exactly what's happening. In my opinion, all commercial physical mediums are fraudsters. And this is supported by the notion of many people who often don't know much about the history of physical mediumship and also about the history of these particular mediums. So they are highly uncritical, just believe the mediums, believe what they say. And of course, the mediums, they're all very nice guys and humorous, and they appear to be very cool. And I know what I talk about. I was on very good terms with Kai for many years. But after all, it's just, in my opinion, a very cool business model. And yeah, my opinion or my recommendation would be to be very, very careful. If you want to check that out, do it, but be really careful and be also very attentive regarding to what you believe and what you don't believe. All right, that's it from my side. And thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, indeed. Thank you very much for your presentation. Good way to show how to scientifically investigate these strange phenomena. I mean, to have enough of controls, as you show, they can make very much fraud, especially in dark rooms, etc. It's very difficult to be accepted to do these investigations, and you have noticed that there are very much of fraud. And one question is, of course, why they do this. Is this because they want to confirm people coming and wanting to have proof of something beyond our normal reality, etc.? That's one question, of course. And also, can we understand that the same is the case for other mediums, or can it be that there are other mediums that may be more pure or mixed? Sometimes they cheat and sometimes they are real.
Yeah. Well, as I showed earlier in my talk, I do think that there are real mediums, and I gave examples of some. And I also think that some mediums are also mixed. I think Eusapia Palladino is a prominent example, and she even admitted that. He said, well, if you don't watch out and if you don't really properly control me, I'm likely to cheat and do movements that look like cheating. So yes, of course, that also happens. And this is also one more aspect what makes studying physical mediums so difficult. Because if you find that one medium performs a fraudulent maneuver, you have to be careful to say, well, that's a fraudulent medium. Perhaps the medium is still genuine, or it's a mixed medium. And for example, I also know many people who say that even Kai is a mixed medium. It might be, and I won't even exclude that some of the table phenomena that we experienced in the early sittings, when there was no trance involved and all these things, I experienced some really weird table movements and table levitations. I'm not willing to say that this was a fake. I have no grounds to say that. Maybe it was even a genuine table levitation. But I'm convinced that from the moment on that Kai developed his trance, this is a fake, what he produced from then on, because I believe that the trance itself is already nothing but fake. But so you have to be really careful. And also in my talk, I was now quite explicit about my opinion regarding these mediums. And I also think one should be really careful with expressing such opinions, and one should really only say that if you're really, really sure about it. And with regard to Kai, I am perfectly sure, because I really know all this very well. And I was perfectly involved in all this personally. And with regard to the other mediums, well, I think I relied basically on the reports of other people, and I put one and one together and so on. But I know that there are other mediums also, such as Stuart Alexander. I briefly mentioned him in the beginning. So for example, this is one medium I simply don't know enough to make a firm opinion, because I know that many people really say that he is genuine. And he also is not too keen on associating with the other mediums who hang around together a lot. There's also David Thompson, and so that they hang around and they fight with each other. But Stuart Alexander always kept himself somehow apart from that. There was, of course, this stupid happening with Colin Fry, his buddy. But I don't know enough to say something firm on Stuart Alexander, so I would never accuse him to be a fraudulent medium, because I simply don't know enough. And also I don't know enough evidence that would justify this notion. So maybe he's a genuine medium or mixed medium, whatever. I only spoke about mediums about whom there is so many known already. But sometimes it's published in remote places on the internet or in magazines. People don't know it. So I found it important also in my 2018 paper to summarize all that and to make all the knowledge that does exist on these mediums available to a wider audience. So if people really want to go there to see sittings with Warren Kaler, Gary Mannion, Kai Mügge, please go there, but know what people say, know what people write about them, to not uncritically believe it, or even spread falsehoods about the purported genuineness of their phenomena, which, in my opinion, if you go to these seances and you see all these things, it may really seem it's extremely difficult to fake. But once you really study that things and get experience more and more and know how people operate and how they think and work, and maybe also the people surrounding them, because it's kind of a bubble that protects these mediums, because it's a very good business, then it becomes more and more easy to see how the things are produced and how they are faked.
Once you find out that they lie to you when you ask them something and they lie about it and later are honest, then there is some kind of mistrust about everything they do. And they are very much aware of that. But it's good to know that there may be some persons who don't want to associate too much with these other persons, and they might be more honest. We don't know that.
Yes.
Yeah. Adrian, have you any question or comment? You unmute.
Okay, Michael, I first want to say what a brilliant presentation you made. It was very entertaining and really interesting to follow. And what was, I think, the best of all is that you seem to enjoy it yourself, and that comes over your enthusiasm. I'm sorry we're so few, but at least it gave you a chance to train your technology a bit, so you now know how to press the right buttons from now onwards. Yeah, just a simple question then. Surely you must conclude from this that ectoplasm is false, and it's not really worth spending much time in that area. Of course, one can't say the same thing about physical mediumship or psychokinesis in general, but I think surely one needs to be a little more discriminating. I mean, Kai was in Sweden a few years ago, but I didn't think of, after reading your reports, that it was any justification whatsoever to spend time on him. I mean, what's your orientation now? I mean, isn't it better to look at, as you said, or more or less conclude, those who have these apparent abilities but don't make money out of it, and almost certainly these abilities are not reliable. They occur often very spontaneously.
Well, talking about ectoplasm, I think this was your first question. Yes, indeed, I think ectoplasm is fake. And at least if you talk about ectoplasm in the sense of that white substance that emanates from medium's mouth, nose, ears, like the classical pictures that I also showed in the beginning, and that Kai and Warren Kayla and all these people show, Gordon Higgins, and I think really that's all fake. And it's also interesting to see that this virtually began with Linda Gazzera and especially with Eva C. Before that, you don't find that phenomenon.
Mm. Yeah.
You find all kinds of mediums, and of course they produced materialized figures in white clothes, or maybe in white shrouds of fog, and also the spirit photography of the 19th century. But you don't find this particular type of ectoplasm that comes out of the medium's mouth and forms amorphous masses and that stuff. This really began only with Linda Gazzera and Eva C. And if you really study that material already about Linda and Eva, I think it's obvious that this is a fraud. And also the other mediums that I've shown, if you really study that and the reports and all the context, and if you know if you put it into a context of today, how Kai argues, how all these mediums argue, how they produce their phenomena, I see such a close similarity that I conclude that every medium who produces this type of white ectoplasm is a fraud. This is my personal conclusion, and this is also why among the mediums I listed, I'm more sympathetic towards them, like Daniel Hume, Eusapia Palladino, Indridi Indridason, Mirabelli, and there are some mediums that produced phenomena in light conditions, or at least in dim conditions, that were not relying on black darkness, and they also did not produce this type of ectoplasm. So, and actually for me, it seems to be a kind of a discriminator. If a medium claims to produce this type of ectoplasm, it's a fraud, and I immediately lose interest in it.
Yeah.
Mediums claim to be only able to do, I don't know, macro PK, spoon bending, you name it, that interests me more. And I still think that this is something extremely important also in terms of parapsychological research and theorizing. So in principle, I'm very much open to studying macro PK with gifted individuals, and even have some plans to work with two people who claim to be able to do spoon bending on a reliable scale. We want to get our hands on that and work with them, because this is really interesting. And as I said, even Uri Geller, I think there was something with this guy. I don't think that he was a fraud, entire fraud. I don't think so. Mm. And this is, of course, difficult to find people who are able to, are willing to be part of such investigations, who are willing to work with experimenters and all that stuff. But yeah, I think we should still try to find these people and to work with them and to do the best we can, and not to think that all macro PK is not worth investigating. I definitely don't think that's the case. Or just look at the studies that Jimeno in Argentina did with this guy who was able to do weird table stuff in daylight, and they had all these instruments connected to the table. I mean, that's perfect. This is exactly what should be done. But regarding Warren Kayla and all these people, I mean, once they are caught once more in a fraudulent setting, they say, no, I'm really a genuine medium, and my spirits now told me in a few months, in a few years, we will be able to work with infrared cameras and with thermal imaging, and then you can study me. But this never happens. This is the problem. It's just, I wrote this one short piece for the Paranormal Review, and I termed this promissory mediumship, because they always make promises they never keep. And this is engaging with this type of mediums is really no use, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there.
Yeah. Yes, those ideas are very good if you find people who claim to be able to do macro PK. It's easier to control in daylight, etc. Really. Okay, anybody else having any question?
Well, I'll just comment. Group phenomena can be quite interesting, perhaps as well. Like the Phillips experiments, also the Sven Turk phenomena, where they photographed it from 3 angles. That was produced some interesting results. So that's also maybe approach groups that are claimed to be able to produce, for example, table levitation.
Exactly, and this is in fact precisely the way that we started out in Kai's cellar in Hanau, when he launched his blog in 2008, and I joined them for the table sittings. He had all these headings on his blog, like he was replicating the Batchelor experiments, he was doing that, and he was framing it in PK sitter group stuff and Philip experiments, and we wanted to do precisely that. And at one point, he started to develop this trance, and then the spirit communicators came in. And then also on his blog, he increasingly promoted this spiritualist approach, which initially wasn't a matter at all. And I also had discussions with him at that time, saying, Kai, it's not good for your reputation. If you want to do some kind of scientific investigations regarding table phenomena, what you put on your blog more recently is not good for your reputations, because it's kind of a low-level esoteric stuff. But already at that time, he wouldn't listen and go more and more and more in this direction and farther away from that scientific stuff, which was a great disappointment for me and also for the circle leader at that time, who was also there because we wanted to investigate that stuff from a scientific perspective. And even in the years to come, he even took down Kai, all that stuff from Batchelor, the Owens, the Philip group, and all the scientific stuff. And he removed that from his blog and put all the spiritistic stuff there and communication with space beings. And it got weirder and weirder. And I didn't understand that. In retrospect, of course I understand it, because it was the plan from the start. This plan was from the start, his aim to first start with a scientific and serious reputation and generate attention in the internet among interested people, and then slowly move into the direction that attracts increasingly uncritical people who would be increasingly willing to pay to visit that stuff. And so in the initial years, also visiting his sittings was free. It was just a matter of, who wants to come, and if the person would be trusted, you can just come and sit. There was no commercial interest whatsoever. And this is also one of the arguments he always used at that time. I'm not interested in commercial stuff. No, I'm just doing this because of my spiritual mission or whatever. But once his reputation was established, then the money came in, and then everything became clear. At least that's how I see it. And also, it's all very stupid with his screen sharing stuff, but I have many interesting materials on my PC that I could show. For example, already at the third blog post that Kai put on his blog, it was back in 2008. It contained a face, a paranormally produced face that was allegedly produced by a spirit light on a sheet of paper by direct writing. But it soon turned out it was a coin rubbing of a German coin, and this face perfectly matched this face on that coin. But it was not visible that this from a coin because it was on the face, and the borders, the shape of the coin was not part of the scribbling. And Kai used this, although at that time he knew, and we all knew, that this was a coin rubbing, to highlight this as a spectacular paranormal face of an unknown man. Of course, we all knew that this was Kurt Schumacher from a 2 D-Mark coin. So already at that time, he purposefully boasted things which he certainly knew was wrong, to boast it in this way. And so, you know, this is why I came to believe that this was all a great plan from the start. And we also know that Kai, before he started this group, he actually, under a pseudonym, he had accounts in forums for magicians and asked them, could you please tell me how to produce paranormal sitting phenomena? I'm searching for magical tricks that I can apply for my sittings. I plan to do a TV documentary, and could you please tell me your tricks? And this was even before he went online with his blog. So he was clearly interested in all that, and also, you know, the Delight Flight is something that you don't find easily in the web and all that stuff. So he was deep into the magician stuff, and he did research in the internet and wherever, and really he knew where to get what props. And some of his phenomena are extremely difficult to explain in conventional terms. I don't have an explanation for all his phenomena, but I'm still convinced that they are fake. But he really was really good at it, and he is really good at it, but not good enough.
No. And this you can find out when you start investigating him and find that he did this pre-research before getting public.
Yeah.
All right, very good, very good. Okay, I think we seems to be full up with new impressions about this phenomena. So I think we just say thank you to you, and we'll see when we meet again.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent.
Thanks. Very good.
For the invitation. Okay. Thanks. Bye, Göran and Anne-Kathrin.
Bye. 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 Super. Yes.